Hi, everyone, and welcome to this brief webinar on microaggressions in the workplace. My name is Dr. Dennis John, and I'm the founder and CEO of Without Exception. We help organizations reach their goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the way we do that is by using a systems perspective to identify starting points and concrete actions that promote more equity and belonging for all employees. After completing my doctorate in organizational leadership and spending the last 20 years in education and nonprofit leadership roles, I started this company to help organizations integrate inclusive practices into every part of professional life. During our session today, we're going to explore the topic of microaggressions. We'll push beyond the typical business cases for inclusion you may have already heard about or be familiar with to include the psychological impacts of exclusionary behavior. We'll define microaggressions, identify different types, and explore ways in which they show up in organizational life. And finally, we'll close our session by examining our own roles in committing microaggressions and how we can respond in productive ways to ensure people feel safe and heard. So let's begin with what we know. Since 2003, organizations have spent upwards of $8 billion on diversity programs. And yet, in the last 6 years, the number of Black men appointed to Fortune 100 boards has increased by only 1%. Even though we know that ethnically diverse and gender diverse companies far outperform industry competitors. So there's still work to be done here. More often than not, we're spending money in the wrong ways and it's not yielding desired results. The type of change we seek requires a type of commitment that extends beyond typical arguments that tout financial gains. In this session, we'll cover how you can be a more active contributor to making your organization more welcoming and inclusive. This improves business outcomes, yes, but more importantly, it makes your organization a more enjoyable and interesting and more diverse place to work. In order to do this, we'll need to come to terms with the fact that sometimes our behaviors and actions, even if unintentional, can make direct reports, colleagues, and clients feel unwelcome and disrespected. They can undermine the relationships we build with important stakeholders, and in turn, these interpersonal consequences can erode trust in the workplace and worsen organizational climate. To create more equitable environments, we'll need to build this understanding at every level of professional life, from our one-on-one interactions to the organizational culture norms that force marginalized groups to distinguish between being at work versus belonging there. So what are microaggressions exactly? Microaggressions are everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, or insults that people of color, women, LGBTQ populations, and groups that have been historically marginalized experience in their daily interactions with others. Microaggressions can occur anywhere without being named as such, including instances that relate to aggression, competition, hierarchy, and even bullying. In the United States, the study of microaggressions began with analyzing the experiences of racial minorities, but this body of literature now expands to include microaggressions based on gender, sexual orientation, role, ability, and even culture differences. There are three types of microaggressions that we need to become familiar with today. The first are microassaults. Microassaults are intentional acts of discrimination. These include racial slurs or symbols like the Confederate flag. It also includes derogatory language like China virus in reference to COVID-19. These are all examples of microassaults. Microinsults are another form of microaggression. These are comments that indicate that the person doesn't fit the stereotype of a particular group, even though the perpetrator thinks they just rendered a compliment. Statements like, "You're good at math for a girl," or "Your English is so good," are examples of microinsults. Micro-invalidations are the third form of microaggression. These are comments or actions that simply dismiss the experiences of historically disadvantaged group members. Statements like, "I'm colorblind," or I don't see color," or asking questions like, "Where are you really from?" are examples of micro-invalidations. Often the invisible nature of this phenomenon prevents perpetrators from realizing and confronting their own complicity in creating psychological dilemmas for marginalized groups. The first three behaviors you see listed here, mispronouncing a person's name after they corrected you, calling on men while ignoring women in meetings, or calling on only white colleagues, or scheduling project deadlines or meetings during religious holidays, are all examples of micro-invalidations. They're micro-invalidations because they convey messages to the targeted groups that they are invisible. The final two behaviors you see listed here, using heteronormative examples to explain a point, like atoms attract like men and women, or referring to a colleague by the wrong pronoun, are all examples of micro-insults. They're micro-insults because they convey a message to the target that these microaggressions that they are not normal. As you may be able to tell, microaggressions convey specific messages or meanings to its targets. So let's dive in a little bit deeper on the messages that microaggressions send to marginalized groups. Let's start by examining the term microaggression itself. The term microaggression is a bit of a misnomer because in most cases, there's nothing micro or overtly aggressive about them. Instead, let's consider microaggressions as subtle acts of exclusion. Microaggressions are everyday slights, remember. Indignities, put downs, or insults that people of color, women, LGBT communities, and groups that have been historically marginalized experience in their daily interactions with others. Many microaggressions come off as compliments, but have hidden insults toward target groups. All the actions or behaviors you see in the box to the left represent examples of microaggressions that have an effect of excluding or putting down people from marginalized social groups. All of these actions or behaviors in some way make an assumption about how an individual compares to a social group they are a member of. Sometimes such comments reveal a hidden negative stereotype about a group, even when phrased positively. So let's take a look at each one of these actions or behaviors one by one. The first one says, a man is given credit for an idea that a woman had already explained during a meeting. Giving a man credit for a woman's previously stated idea renders her invisible. The next one, asking, where are you really from? In making these comments, we may be thinking that we're engaging the other individual by showing an interest in their background, but in reality, what we're communicating is that the target of this microaggression is a curiosity. They don't belong and they're not normal. And the final action or behavior, asking someone with an invisible cognitive disability to read something quickly, saying something like, it's so easy, it'll just take a minute. A person with an invisible cognitive disability, maybe from a past stroke or a head injury, might not be open about that disability with coworkers. And they may struggle with some tasks that seem easy for others, especially if put on the spot to do them quickly. It can make them feel as though they're not normal or inadequate. It's important to recognize that more people than we think are walking around with invisible disabilities, and it's helpful to not make assumptions of what should be easy for others. As you can see, microaggressions can take on many different forms and communicate different meanings to different groups, not just based on race or gender, but can extend to ability, religion, and sexual orientation. The impact of microaggression on its targets is also very real on multiple levels. Let's think about this for a second. Remember, microaggressions are brief and commonplace. They are daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities. Whether intentional or unintentional in nature, they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights or insults toward people from marginalized groups. The very commonplace manifestation of microaggressions contributes to an onslaught of injuries to the psyche that may feel unrelenting and can result in everything from depression, fatigue, and anger to physical ailments like chronic infections, thyroid problems, and even high blood pressure, not to mention the impact on self-esteem or feelings of not belonging or exclusion. A conversation about microaggressions wouldn't be complete without discussing the role of power in professional settings. Power differentials exist between men and women, people of color and white people, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people or sexual minorities, and heterosexual people, and transgender people and cisgender people. And these power differentials can manifest in normative values that determine which differences are unwelcome and unvalued in the workplace. In a study completed in 2013, researchers found that microaggressions that targeted study participants, in this case lesbian and gay men, had roots in heteronormativity, sinfulness, homophobia, over-sexualization, under-sexualization, and humor as used as vehicles for division. These results suggested an unsafe work situation, and therefore a difficult journey toward disclosing sexual identity in the workplace. Power dynamics were at play here and sent signals to everyone, the valued norms of that space and which identities may not be welcome. As a result of these power differentials across different types of interpersonal relationships, those on the receiving end of microaggressions are burdened with figuring out ways to cope, survive, and work through what can often feel like uninviting or even hostile work environments. These coping mechanisms can range from rationalizing exclusionary behavior to dismissing it to blaming oneself or normalizing the behavior as being okay or widely accepted. In time, these coping mechanisms erode trust and form more insular, unwelcoming spaces. But all is not lost. As individuals, we can take small but important steps to eliminate microaggressions we may commit. It's important to remember that we all make mistakes, and addressing microaggressions directly can be intimidating. But by normalizing these conversations, it makes it easier to call people in and address issues as they arise, providing an opportunity for learning, healing, and growth. So, when someone confronts you of a microaggression you committed, remember, apologize without placing blame on the other person. Regardless of your intentions, acknowledge the impact your actions had on the other person, and do the work. Don't ask people of color or folks from marginalized groups to tell you what to do differently. We all have an opportunity here to get more educated, but do ask for clarity if something is shared that you don't understand. Finally, it's important that organizations and leaders model behaviors and establish practices that promote safe environments. In order to do this, I'd like you to consider 3 points. First, expect microaggressions to occur. When people are working closely together, or even when they are trying to form inclusive spaces, microaggressions are bound to happen. As organizational leaders, we need to focus our attention on the psychological and emotional health of our stakeholders. This includes those who are targets of microaggressions, observers, and even the perpetrators of microaggressions. There are no good people or bad people or neutral bystanders in these situations. It's going to take all of us to form healthy and safe professional environments. The same person who is the target of a microaggression in one instance may be the perpetrator in the next. Our goal as leaders is to raise awareness enough so that we minimize the likelihood of committing microaggressions and we feel empowered enough to intervene when we see them happening to ourselves and others. The next point is codifying anti-microaggression policies and procedures. Employees need to know where to turn if speaking up about a microaggression does not go well or if microaggressions continue to occur. Having these formal policies and procedures in place are crucial for organizational accountability, but it's not about penalizing people who make a mistake. It's about making the space to identify the problem and intervene in the moment to prevent further harm. The final point is modeling non-defensiveness. When we are called out for committing microaggressions, it is critical that as leaders we model non-defensiveness to establish tone and set an example for the rest of the organization. Well, that's it. I hope you found this brief webinar useful and thought-provoking. I want to close our session today by asking you one simple question. Are you acting intentionally to form more equitable environments for your stakeholders? Without exception, we seek to expand conversation of the utility of equitable environments beyond the financial benefits. So, whether you're looking to build more equitable opportunities for employees or leverage diversity to beat the competition, we can help. We can design DE&I initiatives from the ground up. We can build on existing inclusion efforts to form a more cohesive strategy, and we can leverage over 2 decades of experience, focus on changing systems from within. And I know together we can create the right organizational learning experiences that make sense for you and your organization.